Hi Jets! It's me, it's Jenna, Jen Pan Travels. I was expecting to, make this video today because I knew interviews were coming up. However, US actually released their results today. So a lot of people are either, freaking out because they got accepted for an interview or are sad because they didn't, which is unfortunate. But if JET is something you really want to do, the advice I'd offer for the people who don't get in, don't sit around another year waiting for JET. Spend the next year expanding yourself more. Learn Japanese. Study the culture. Study the history. Form connections with people. Go to different festivals. Deepen yourself, because if you spend the next year not doing anything but waiting for JET, they're going to see that in your application, and they're not going to want someone who just sits around and waits for JET. You might get in with that, but expand yourself more. Expand your knowledge. Expand your skill set. Take a TEFL course. Do something to help you if you want to apply again next year. Don't sit around and just wait. Now, with that being said, there are several people who did get their interview notifications from the US today, and several other countries have already gotten their notifications, so that's great. You're here for the interview. You're Google searching, you're YouTubing how to find out how to ace your interview. I'm going to be very blunt with you. There is no way to ace your interview. You have all these JETs out there saying, oh, if you do this, you'll ace your interview. You might have a good interview. They may not be wrong with that. But that's not going to guarantee you to get into the program, because there is no mathematical equation to get into the program. It's a combination of many things, and every person is different. So if you're looking here for how to ace your interview, that's not a thing. Everyone can have a good interview and have it go completely different. However, there is advice that previous JETs and other people can offer you to help with your interview. There are wrong things to do in your interview, but there's not necessarily 100% right things. There is some things that everyone should do in their interview is don't show up wearing casual clothes. There's been a lot of questions on the Reddit page. If you don't know, there is a Reddit page for JET program made by JETs and run by JETs. And it's for aspiring, current, and past JETs to give advice, ask questions. So I would look there. Before you post anything on that though, please go into the search bar of the particular subreddit and see if your question has already been answered within the last 2 years. Some of the questions can get outdated because, up to it was a couple years ago, applications weren't online. They were all mailed in hard copy. You had to make sure that your copy got to the consulate by the time the application was due. It had to be postmarked by the time the application was due. So things are always changing. So I would go by the last 2 years of questions and answers. If you don't have an answer to the question you want or the question you have, feel free to post it in the subreddit and have people answer it, but make sure you say, hey, I looked on other questions on here and I'm not finding the answer I'm looking for. JET is a very wonderful community, but there are a few people who get tired of everyone asking, what should I wear? What should I wear? What should I wear? Or what do they ask you in the interview? Technically, we aren't allowed to share what we were asked in our interview. There is a disclosure agreement that we all have to sign before we get into our interview saying we aren't going to talk about what happened in our interview. So we can't share what we say in our interview. We're not supposed to. But there is a generic advice that we can give you based on what other people have said to us, what we have found ourselves. There are jets who have shared their interview experience, so I'm sure you can find them. There's questions that people have posted that they've been asked in the past interviews and everything. So you can find those if you want to. But I'm just here to offer you advice, give you some pointers so you make sure those are in the back of your head, and to make sure you sound genuine when you interview and you don't sound rehearsed. So with that being said, first thing, again, don't dress like you're in casual clothes. Don't dress in casual clothes. The most recommended item to wear when you are going for a jet interview is a suit. Now, if you do not have a suit, that is fine. Don't go out and blow $200 on a suit. It is not a mandatory requirement, but it is heavily encouraged because that's what young professionals in Japan wear when they go to interview. So they wear a business suit. They have business suit packages in Japan. For women, it's a pair of heels, a skirt, a blazer, a top, and a purse, I think. For men, it's standard suit, tie, dress shoes. So a lot of people do wear suits because that's what they were told to wear by other people giving advice. If you don't have a suit, that's fine. Don't freak out. If you can find a cheap suit, go ahead, go out and get it. If you think you'll be wearing a suit, if you don't get into the JET program, think of this if I get an interview and I don't get in, am I going to use this suit again? A lot of job interviews you can wear suits to, but a lot of people in America don't. So are you going to use it again if you don't get into the program? If not, don't waste your money on it. You can have a blazer. If you have a blazer, I would suggest, even if you're not going to get into the program, even if you don't know if you're going to accept the position, if you get offered it, having a blazer is a good staple to have in any wardrobe for any individual. Get a good blazer, black, blue, gray, staple item. If you can, get like matching pants. Doesn't have to be the same shade of gray or black or blue. Try to get as close as you possibly can. The jet I got advice from, she said suit, but she said she got a matching blazer and skirt. You can find those in a lot of stores. You can find them for pretty cheap. Shop sale racks, people aren't gonna know. No, you don't have to buy really fancy dress shoes. If you're not gonna wear them, don't spend a lot of money on them, but get some nice shoes, have some nice shoes. Girls, my personal opinion, don't wear anything with a skinny heel. Get a wide heel, something that's stable. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's gonna be winter. Most times when people interview, I don't know if that'll ever change in the future, but it's always been winter. So there's gonna be snow, there's gonna be water, the floor is gonna be wet. You don't want us to slip in a stiletto. You can bring other shoes to change into, but the floor might still be wet in other areas. It might be slick. I just wouldn't suggest very thin heels. If you choose to wear heels, I would suggest flats. Less likely to fall, I guess, have more stability on your feet. Men, dress shoes. No polos or in khaki sets. I wouldn't come in with a cardigan on instead of a blazer, my opinion. If you do want to, that's fine. That's up to you. But just make sure you look presentable. Make sure you're wearing business professional, not business casual, not casual, business professional wear. That's what a lot of jets, a lot of consulates give advice for, is business professional. With that being said, there you go. You're ready, dressed for the interview. I am different. I was in the times of COVID, so my interview was online. Even if you're doing an online interview, you may be asked to get up and move around. Maybe, I don't know. So don't just dress from the top up. Dress full head to toe, business wear. If you feel professional, you're going to be professional. Now, if you're interviewing in person, you're going to have other people with you in the interview waiting area. treat them with respect. Treat them as if they're your colleagues. Don't be snooty. Don't ignore them. I don't know if people, observe that behavior when you're sitting out there or not, or when you're in your Zoom waiting room, but don't be rude. Don't be rude. Be a nice human. There are a lot of people in my upgrade chat that said, people were really stone cold. They didn't talk to anyone. I know that it's nerves, but I was nervous last year too, and I ended up talking to the 2 other girls that were in the weight room with me, and it really helped me ease my nerves. It helped me get my brain off the fact that I was about to go into a possibly life-changing interview. So just treat people with respect. Then, when you get into the interview, you're going to be asked a bunch of questions. I can't tell you what those questions are. I think the list changes for every individual with every group of people that asks. None of you are going to get the same interviewers, well, in a sense. All the consulates have different people interviewing all the different consulates. Each consulate has like several groups of people who are interviewing jets or potential jets. So it's really an opinion-based interview, how you impress the people that you're with. And every person's opinion is different. So again, there's no way to ace this because every scenario is different. Famous words of Jet, he said, every situation is different. So there's no way to ace your interview, but there are things you can remember to do in your interview when you're talking to those individuals. The biggest tip I got is don't forget to smile. And you think, oh no, I won't forget to do that. I forgot to do it. I was like halfway through my interview and I was focusing so hard on my questions and furrowing my brow, and all of a sudden I was like, I have just looked probably angry this whole interview. I have not smiled, I have not laughed, I have not given them a friendly persona because I was always very deep in thought. And it's fine to look deep in thought. You don't have to smile the whole interview. That may be a little unsettling, but don't forget to smile when you're in the interview. Don't forget to laugh. Don't forget to be at ease. If you're too rigid, if you're too straight, they're gonna notice that. So don't forget to smile. If you're doing a Zoom interview, maybe write yourself a sticky note somewhere on your computer if you want to, like write this down. And before you go into your consulate, look at the brief list. That's fine. Do that. Even though it's such a natural behavior, it's something you need to think about doing when you're in a situation like that. So don't forget to smile. Just be yourself, be friendly, be carefree. They're looking for someone who will interact well with other people. I mean, I don't think they'd be looking for someone who wouldn't interact well with other people. So make sure your personality is there. Make sure your friendliness is there. If you're a friendly person, make sure it's there. I don't know if it's going to be a benefiting factor into it, but you don't want to give people the wrong impression. This is your first physical impression to the people of Jet, to the consulate, to the interviewers. This is your first impression that isn't on paper. Make sure you do it well. Then, after, you think, okay, smile, smile, smile. When they ask you questions, sorry, my tripod just died. When they ask you questions, if this works for me, when they ask you questions, I'm going to hold it so it doesn't do that again. When they ask you questions, it's okay if you need to stop and think. It's okay if you need to think. That's fine. They're not going to dock you for, oh, I don't know the answer. Let me think about that. They're not going to dock you for that. If they did, I'd be a little concerned. You're allowed to think. You're not allowed to, you don't have to spit out the answers immediately. You're allowed to think, I'm going to fix this real quick because this is buggy. Okay, something keeps happening with my tripod. I don't know what's wrong with it. I'm returning it. I'm getting rid of it. I don't know what's happening. That being said, back to the interviews. So you are allowed to think in the interview process. You're allowed to stop and think about an answer to a question. You don't have to have all the answers. They don't want you to have all the answers. If you have all the answers, it's going to seem really rehearsed and you're not going to seem genuine. So it's okay if you're like, ooh, I don't remember that right away, or, oh, I don't know if I know that answer to that question. Let me think about it. They would rather you think than to just spit it out. If you realize, I know the answers to all these questions, maybe stop, calm down a little bit, and, take a few minutes to just think about it before you answer it. There was a question I was asked in my interview, and I answered it, I was like, oh, I know this answer, and I answered it, and then a few seconds later, I realized that's not the question they asked me, and it was already gone, so I didn't give them the answer. It's not that I didn't give them the answer they're looking for. They're not looking for one right answer, but I didn't even float around the general area. So it's okay if you give yourself time to stop and think about the questions. That's fine. They're okay with that. If you take too long, that might be a little concerning because you only have a certain amount of time in the interviews. That's going to take up a lot of your other time in the interview. So you want to make sure you think about it, but don't think too long because you might run your whole interview just thinking to the answer of one question. Again, floating around the area of questions. There are a lot of sample questions online for JET. I've mentioned that before. There's a lot of JETs who have posted their experiences in their interview, their questions for JET. It's okay if you look at those because I think it will give you some brief understanding of what may be asked in the interviews for JET, but it's not going to be 100% what the experience is. There are questions on there you will never be asked. There are questions on there that you will be asked. But if you go in and you rehearse answers to all those questions again, you're going to seem very robotic. You're going to seem very ungenuine. And there has been individuals who have interviewed and said, I could immediately tell they went online, read the questions, and rehearsed them over and over and over again. And when I realized that, I stopped listening to any answers they had to say. JET doesn't want a right answer. They want your answer. So if you want to briefly look at those lists just to see what they have on there, that's fine. But don't lay out your whole plan of an interview on those questions. If you want a family member to look at them and maybe throw you a couple that you might be asked and you don't look at the entire list, that's fine. Do that. Practice it. I practiced questions before I went into the interview, but I practiced the questions that I think would catch me off guard. I went through the list. I had I think I could answer those questions, so I didn't practice those because I didn't want a rehearsed answer. So it's okay if you look at those lists. Don't expect to have the answer or the questions on those lists. Don't rehearse them to the high heavens. You want to practice for the interview, but you don't want to practice that hard. Because then you're just really going to seem like a plain piece of paper. You're going to seem very stock image, everything like that. So you want to bring a little bit of your personality into the interview. Actually, most of your personality. One other thing I think you should take into real consideration for the interview is, sorry, lost my train of thought. Is to review your application. There it is. Review your application. Now, I hope that you guys saved a copy of your application or at least know what you put on there. Because anything in your application you can be asked about. It's like any job. They can ask you about the skills you have. They can ask about your references, your work history. Anything you mention in that application, they can and or will ask about. And one of the pieces of advice I was given is make sure you know that back to front, because you may be asked questions and they may be trying to slip you up. They may be asking a question that in a way is like, yeah, I talked about that in my statement of purpose, but the way they ask it is not a true statement. And if you agree to that, you just agreed to possibly lying or putting a false statement on your application. They don't do this to try and trip you up, but they want to make sure that you are being honest. So review, what did I put down for my work history, my skill sets? What did I write in my statement of purpose? If anything, know that back to front. Don't know the questions, the sample questions, but know your statement of purpose and your application back to front. It's not a guarantee that they'll ask you about anything in that, but if you answer a question and it's not matching up with your application, that's a red flag to them. This was a question that was recently asked about on Reddit, or was mentioned on Reddit, and someone was asking about how to prepare for interviews, and it was said, make sure you know your application, your statement of purpose back to front. And they were like, what's a sample question so you can provide me so I understand what you're talking about? And I should have looked it up before this video, but someone was along the lines like, oh, well, I put down that I had art experience working in like an art, or I did a lot of art for a kids camp or something along those lines. And they asked me about that, so I had to talk about it if they asked me about it, and I was like, oh, yeah, and then didn't go into any detail. That might look like an individual is lying about their experience. Or if they ask a certain thing about your medical history and it's like, oh, yeah, I did have that, but if they say, oh, do you presently have this? No, I said I didn't have it anymore. If you say, oh, yeah, and as if like, yeah, I had it, if you just say, yeah, it's going to look like you're lying, because then all of a sudden, oh, you have it currently, but you said you were recovered. There's another one where, they ask about like, oh, do you have any teaching experience? If someone's like, oh, yeah, I have this, this, and this on my application, and then they ask you to maybe describe details of your teaching experience. I wasn't asked this. I have teaching experience. This is just an example that I've seen other people write about. It's not my experience. These are my experiences. It was like, oh yeah, I have teaching experience. And then maybe it was like they just sat in a corner of a classroom. They ask, well, what did you do during those teaching experience? What are some lessons? And you can't bring up those lessons. That's a red flag. That's a red flag. And this also brings on the topic of like, oh, you said you had a driver's license. Can you drive? It's like, oh, well, I can drive if I have somebody else in the car with me. That was another thing I've seen on Reddit. Jet asks if you have a license in case they need to put you in a driving placement. If you say yes to that, there's a likeliness you are going to be in a driving placement and we'll have to get a car and we'll have to pass the Japanese driving test. So based on where you live and what kind of license you have, there's some US states that are exempt from having to take the test and they can just transfer it. So if you can't drive without another individual or you don't feel comfortable driving in Japan or wanting to buy a car, taking the test, contact your consulate, say, hey, I put this and I no longer want to have that. Best to change anything in your application if your address changed. If you notice something's incorrect, if your medical history needs to be updated, contact your consulate as soon as you can. Get that changed before the interview because it's best to get it changed before rather than later. Because once they start saying, oh, you're accepted and here's your placement. And then you're like, oh, I didn't want to drive. And you're in a driving placement. you have that placement now, and if you reject it, you have to wait another year to apply to the program again. Or you have to take that placement, and if you're, okay, I didn't want to drive, but, now that I have to, I will. I'm in that situation right now. I'm in a placement where it's like, well, it'd be better if you could drive, but you don't have to. As if you're close enough to the school living, you don't have to drive. But to get around my prefecture, it's very convenient to drive. So I'm having an internal battle. Like, if I don't need a car, I don't want to spend the money on it. But if I don't have a car, it breaks a lot of my opportunities. I don't have connections to the JR, the big railway. We don't have a bullet train in my prefecture. So like that, since I don't have those opportunities, that cuts a lot of my opportunities down. So I probably will end up getting one. Even though it's not my favorite thing in the world, I don't mind if I have to do it. So with that being said, that's my really jumbled list of, things to take into consideration when you're in an interview. This is not how to ace an interview. It's just things you should have in the back of your mind when you're preparing for or in the current interview. Again, I cannot talk to you about what they asked me, what specific things happened in my interview. You can, again, look online, find all of those things on there. There are plenty of jets who will tell you, but we did sign an agreement saying we wouldn't. So, there's a lot of, jets that are finished that are like, well, I'm done with the program, so what are they going to do? There again is that Reddit page. Search the page first before you ask questions. There's plenty of people on there who want to help you. That's what they're there for. With that being said, good luck on all your interviews. I hope you all do well. If not, I hope you apply again next year.